Hello and welcome to Just a Moment. My name is Kristen Harding. Welcome to the show. We are going to continue our story time today, and we're almost, a good third of the way through this book. And we have gone on so many adventures together. So I'd like you to join us in the continuing story here of the Baron Trump novels and the Last President by Ingersoll Lockwood, written in 1899. And as you know, the reason that I started reading this book was it just seemed awfully coincidental that there might be, in our time now of 2025, an actual person by this name. And it turns out that this is actually the little Baron. He is a Baron. So that's why he is Baron Trump. So that helps. And he has gone on many adventures so far, and he's continuing his adventures now, and he has spent the last, I don't know, what was it, several days, weeks, whatever, fasting and being in this cave where it was so uncomfortable for him. But finally, he graduated to the point where now the hermit has said it's time to continue their journey. So, in summing all of that up, we're going to start on page 93. And just to give you a little reminder, we're going to go, I don't know, a little bit above and say that Benny Aga was petting Bulger, and Bulger was so happy to return the hermit's caresses. They had become the very best of friends, and Bulger felt the fascination of Benny Aga's mysterious power for the very first time. So when the hour arrived for us to leave the rocky chamber of gloom and silence and step out into the sunlight once more, my heart broke out into its old-time beat. Had I not been in the presence of the venerable Bene Aga, I should have leapt and danced for joy as we emerged from the dreary abode and I felt the warm air fan my cheeks once more. But one thing struck me now most forcibly. It was the wonderful change which I noted in the blind hermit himself. When he stood in the sunlight and the morning breezes tossed the curls of his white silken hair like April winds making merry with a flock of snowflakes. First, his appearance was quite different from that to which I had been accustomed. A leathern cap crowned his massive head and held his thick, rebellious hair somewhat in control. His wide, flowing beard had entirely disappeared beneath his rude garb, save where it clothed his face and neck. I saw at once that he was clad for work, for toilsome progress through the Palinmatalan's thick growth. In his right hand he carried a curious rod or wand, long, slender, polished, and extremely flexible. I soon learned to wonder at his extraordinary skill in using the staff to guide his steps or discover the nature of any object not within the reach of his hands. A rude pouch or leather bag was swung across his shoulder. Hello, Darrell. Hello, Paul. The change in Beni Aga's manner was still more noticeable. To me, this change was as pleasing as it was unexpected. In a brief half hour, he became another man. His deep, rich voice, soft and round as the sound of an organ pipe, took on a mellower tone. A faint smile wreathed his noble features as sunlight fell upon them. His step became quick and elastic, his movements brisk and agile. So wonderfully keen were his remaining senses that only the closest observer could have guessed that he was blind. Turning in the direction of the spot where his dogs were at play, he startled me by breaking out into a joyous, "Yo ho, my children! Yo ho, my brothers! Here to me, here to me!" His dogs, Bulger among them, bounded forward with a loud chorus of barking. Beni Aga caught the stranger's voice. "It pains me deeply," he cried, "to rob him of his playfellows, for I see his gambolling and sporting with my children." As the blind hermit stooped, his dogs, with loud cries of sorrow at parting, sprang up to lick his face and hands. "Go, my children, go, my brothers," said Beni Aga. "Content yourself. I'll come again soon, very soon, with love warmed by absence." All was now ready for the start. Beneath the rising sun I could see a long, dark line far away where the earth and sky came together. It was Palin Matalan, home of darkness, the great, gloomy forest. Thither Beni Aga now directed his footsteps with astonishing rapidity of gait, tapping ground with his long polished wand as he hurried along. Awestruck, I followed my blind guide. In comparison with such miraculous powers of hearing, smelling, and feeling, my eyes were worthless. Ever and anon he called out to me, "Guard thee well, my son! A viper stirred in the grass to thy left. Guard thee well, my son! To touch the leaves of the flowering shrub through which we are passing now, they are poisonous. Guard thee well, my son, to taste the waters of the rivulet to which we are coming until I have made trial of its purity. Guard thee well, my son, to pluck one of the flowers which now delights thy eye, and charm thee with their odor. 'Tis next to death to breathe their perfume so close to thy nostrils. Guard thee well, my son, to crush upon thy skin one of the little insects which now fill the air, lest thou spread a subtle poison over thy flesh." As we drew near to the outer edge of the great gloomy forest, a strange joy lit up Beni Aga's face. He beat the air with his polished wand in graceful curves and circles, as he poured forth, half singing, half reciting, a sort of chant, invocation, or mysterious greeting to Palin Matalan, home of darkness. Ooh, that was cool. That was like an effect, and it went, oh, I didn't intend that, but that was cool. As if charmed by the rich music of his own voice, his spirits ran higher and higher. At times he halted to catch the soft echoes as they came floating back on the wings of the morning air. As nearly as I can remember, Beni Aga's chant was something like this. Oh boy. Oh, la 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 la. Hail to thee, Palin Matalan, shadowy land. La la, lu, la la, lee, lula, loli. Oh my goodness. We are coming to thee, beloved temple of silence and gloom. Let us into thy dark corridors. Palin Matalan, lo ilah, thou art victor. Palin Matalan, my beautiful, from thy buckler of darkness fall the sun's arrows, splintered and broken. Oh la la, la 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 la. We are coming, king of gloom and stillness. Palin Matalan, O silent domain, let us in let us in from the roar and the glare. Let us in from the roofless world. We are near at hand. Palin Matalan, swing open thy black portals, lift thy veil of gloom, admit thy children into thy silent chambers. O Palin Matalan, lo ilo, lo ilo, lo ilo, lo ilah, lo ilah. At last we stood by the very edge of Palin Matalan. Beni Aga swept his polished wand against the foliage of one of the low-hanging, far-reaching branches, then sprang forward and seizing a handful of leaves, crushed them in his grasp. and raised them to his nostrils. "This is not the gateway, my son," he cried. "We must turn farther northward." About an hour and a half later he halted, and reaching out again for a handful of the leaves, inhaled their odor. "Not yet, not yet," he murmured, "somewhat northward still. Be not troubled, my son. Thou seest Palinmatalan with thine outward eye, not so Beni Aga. He must lay his hand upon the very walls of this temple of silence and gloom ere he can see it." Suddenly the blind hermit paused. His thin nostrils quivered, his massive breast heaved convulsively. "We are almost there," he spoke in measured tones. "I catch the perfume of the foliage which clothes the two even columns of the gateway." I looked and saw before me two towering trees, whose wide-reaching branches swept to the very ground. Side by side they stood, alike in gaze and grandeur. Beni Aga passed his hand caressingly over the first branch, which brushed his cheek and pressed its leaves to his lips, then broke out in his wild chant once more. "Well, hello, Matthew. Oh, listening while I work? Good, good. Glad to hear it. And thank you. Shout out to Matthew Turner and the Matrix Minds. They are the reason I'm here." All right, where were we? Broke out in his wild chant once more. I stood looking at the blind hermit and listening to his song of greeting, hardly knowing what to expect next, when suddenly he threw himself upon his knees and crept under the far-reaching branches of one of these gigantic sentinels of the great gloomy forest. Bulger and I followed him. Thus it was we thus it was we entered the domain of the Palinmatalan, home of the darkness. I shall not try to describe to you the solemn stillness, the mysterious twilight of the great gloomy forest, nor to paint for you the wonderful beauty of the deep green mosses which covered rocks and trees, trailed from swaying branches, carpeted the floorway, or hung like heavy canopies from tree to tree above our heads, and increased the gloom caused by the thick, interlacing foliage. I had followed Beni Aga's noiseless, there we go, footsteps about half a mile into the stilly depths of Palinmatalan when I began to feel a strange chill creep over me, beginning at my very fingertips and pursuing its insidious way toward my very vitals. So rapidly did it run its benumbing course that I was upon the point of calling out to Beni Aga when he halted, and having broken a twig from a tree with foliage of dark green and polished leaves, bade me eat them, saying, "Palinmatalan does no harm to those that know him." I found the leaves pungent and agreeable to the taste. Their effect was magical. My limbs at once forgot their numbness, and my step lost its heaviness. We had now been several hours in the great gloomy forest, and thus far Beni Aga had advanced into its ever increasing gloom, for night was falling without a halt. Beni Aga Beni Aga had as many eyes as Argus, and each of Link's power. He could not have pushed his way through Palinmatalan's gloomy corridors more easily and more securely. His polished wand flashed like a thing of life in his miraculously trained hand, touching everything, vibrating, swinging, advancing, retreating, with a rapidity that my eyes could not follow. "O great master," I called to him, "let me not be presumptuous enough to speak to thee of things which should be left unstirred in the chambers of thy mind. But if it be permitted for me to know, tell me how thy rayless eyes can pierce this gloom and find a path through this trackless forest, wrapped in the gloom and silence of 10,000 years. It shall be as thou wishest, my son, replied the blind hermit. The little there is to know thou shalt hear. But surely thy young limbs must be very weary. First, let me make ready a bed for the night and spread some food and drink. So saying, he swung his leathern bag off of his shoulder, took from it a roll of dried skin and spread it on the ground. That would be probably like a leather. Then wrenching 4 pine boughs from a tree nearby, he thrust them in the earth, one at each corner of a square, and striking a spark with his tinder box, set fire to the pitch which trickled down the boughs. The flickering flames cast 1,000 weird shadows on the trailing mosses and black shrouded trees, and filled the air with a grateful warmth. Beni Aga now drew forth some dried fruit and berries. We ate in silence. Bulger sniffed at the food, but nothing more. Our frugal repast concluded, the blind hermit took it from his leathern pouch a sharp pointed piece of flint, which he pierced the bark of a tree near our bivouac. No, I said that wrong. Bivouac. I don't know that word. Into the hole he thrust a slender reed. I was astonished to see a limpid liquid flow from the end of the reed. He filled a gourd with it, and placing the drinking vessel in my hand, said in slow caressing tones, "Drink, my son, 'twill refresh and strengthen thee." I raised the gourd to my lips. The liquid was cool and sweet and very pleasing to the taste. "Drink as deep as thou wilt, my son," cried Beni Aga, for Palin Matalin could slake the thirst of an army. Again I placed the gourd to my lips, and this time I drank long and deep. A gentle warmth now coursed through my limbs. My eyelids sank downward, oppressed with a most delicious longing for sleep. Pillowing my head on Beni Aga's pouch, with my head resting on my faithful Bulger's head, I was soon wrapped in slumber. When I awoke, it was still night. The pine knots had burned nearly out. There sat the blind hermit beside me. I could see that he was keeping watch. His head turned as I stirred. "Thou hast asked me," he began, "to tell thee how I am able to find my way through Palin Matalin's gloom. Here in this trackless home of shadow, no outward eyes would avail me aught. Thou hast seen how the floor of this vast temple is everywhere alike. For it, nature has woven a carpet of thick velvet moss, which, in the flight of centuries, takes on no change of hue. 'Tis ever the same. Tear a pathway in it, in a few short days the rent will be made whole. Blaze the trees, the encircling mosses will, in a brief period, hide the marks, and all thy labor will be in vain. Even supposing that thou couldst succeed in leaving a lasting trail behind thee, the deadly poison which lurks in this damp air would chill thy life blood ere thou couldst cross from outer wall to outer wall of this vast temple, with its roof of interwoven moss and foliage, impenetrable to the noonday sun. Thou hast felt the first touch of that deadly chill, which curdles the warmest blood and sends a deep sleep of death upon the rash intruder. But to me, O my son, Palin Matalin is all light and glow. I cannot see that gloom which strikes such terror to thy soul. And thou must know, my son, that Palin Matalin has no shadows deep enough to hide the North Star from my sight. I always know which way it was the sun went down, and which way it will be that he will rise. For all the winds are known to me, and whence they blow. To thy cheek The air appears to sleep at times, to mine never. 'Tis no more a task for me to catch the breath like zephyr, unfelt by thee, than it is for thy faithful dog to take up the trail of his master's footsteps and follow it through a crowded market. Then again thou must bear in mind that for 100 years and more I've been a shadowless figure in this home of shadows, that the trees of Palin have taken me to their hearts, and I them to mine, that not only do I know how and where they grow, but it hath been revealed to me that these towering children of Palin are not scattered helter-skelter here and there in orderless manner, but that in a certain measure they are ranged in lines from the rising toward the setting sun, each species forming a belt to itself, not like a grove by man's hand planted, but in a wild yet orderly confusion. To thee this would be a useless guide, for thou hast seen how the trunks are swathed in garbs of moss, and how the gloom gives all the foliage the same deep, dark hue of green. To thine eye here all these streams seem alike, the countless offspring of a single sire, and yet it is not so. For when in my progress through these leafy corridors of gloom and silence I sway too far northward or southward, a single handful of leaves crushed in my grasp gives up the secret of my whereabouts. But even this sure guiding strength has failed me at times, and I have gone astray in the home of my friend. And yet in such moments Palin had no terrors for me. When thus an aimless wanderer in his trackless wood, I learned to draw aside this garb of green which decks Palin breast and lay my hand upon its very heart. So has kind nature sharpened my sense of feeling that by the simple touch of the clay beneath our feet I can set my erring footsteps right and regain my lost path. Be thou, my son, in coming years as steadfast in thy search for truth as I have been in my endeavors to change this gloom and silence into living light and speech, and thou wilt walk through life's devious paths as easily as I thread my way through the trackless chambers of Palin. As Beni Aga ceased speaking, he lifted his song, making the trailing mosses sway with the vigor of his notes, now deep and solemn, now clear and far-reaching. The echoes came back, softened down to flute notes. He listened breathlessly. "O wonderful man," thought I, "even even the sleeping echoes rouse themselves to guide thy footsteps aright." "Come, my son," he cried in tones of gladness, "our torches go to their end. Let us push on. Though the sun be not yet high enough to chase the inky darkness out of Palin depths, still with this guiding string thou canst follow me." Saying this, he placed the end of a leather thong in my hand, and we set out once more. After we had been an hour or so under way, the sun's rays began to so temper the darkness of the great gloomy forest that my eyes were of some slight use to me. Again Beni Aga broke out in a wild chant and paused to catch the echo. "Ah," murmured the blind hermit, half in soliloquy, "that was a greeting from the drowsy waters of Lul Patul." Imagine the feeling of utter helplessness which came over me an hour or so later when suddenly I found myself standing upon the banks of a broad streamlet, of hue blacker than the wings of night, apparently stagnant or at least so sluggish as to seem well deserving of the title Drowsy Waters. "This is Lul Paltul," said Beniaga, as he rested his chin on his hand and seemed to be gazing down at its inky surface. But how to cross it? For no bark was moored in sight, was now the bewildering thought which oppressed my mind. Surely it cannot be forded, for to the eye it seemed as deep as it was silent and mysterious. Nor yet would it be otherwise than inviting death itself to plunge into its stagnant waters and swim to the other side. While I stood thus wrapped in a cloud of anxious thought, Beni Aga himself seemed scarcely less perplexed. His usual calmness had deserted him. Drawing some pebbles from his leather pouch, he cast them one by one into the stream, bending forward to catch the sound that they made with an eager listening ear. Then turning to the right, he followed the banks of Lul Patul, keeping his staff in the water and beating it gently with the tip as if striving to draw some secret from it. Again he paused and cast some pebbles into the dark and sluggish stream, and bent forward to get their answer. Again he woke the echoes and listened breathlessly to the reply that came, only to take up the march after a brief delay with what seemed to me a somewhat hesitating step. Evidently he was astray. His calm, noble face lost its look of serene confidence. Suddenly halting, he reached out for a handful of foliage, crushed the leaves in a quick and nervous step, inhaled their odor, then resumed his march as before, with head dropped forward on his breast, and doubt and uncertainty visible in every movement. Excuse me, I need a sip of coffee. In every movement. Well, I didn't have, there we go. For an instant, the thought flashed through my mind that possibly Bene Aga had gone so far astray as to make the discovery of the right course impossible. I could feel my lips draw apart as my heart crept slowly upward into my throat. The thought of a lingering death from starvation in the chill, dark corridors of Palin Matalin sent a knife into my heart. I almost tottered as I followed the blind hermit's lead. My tongue was too dry to let me cry out to him in my sudden despair. While these terrible thoughts were chasing each other through my mind, Beni Aga halted, and resting his staff upon the branches of the nearest tree, broke out into one of his wild invocations. "O Palin Matalin, Beni Aga calls to thee. Hear him, he is astray. Set his feet in the right path. Let him not wander aimlessly about thy gloom and silence. O Palin Matalin, he is thy child. Be kind and loving to him." With these words, Beni Aga threw himself upon his knees, tore away the thick covering of the moss until he had laid bare the forest floor. From this he took up a handful of the soil and pressed it between his fingers as if to test some secret quality. When he arose, I knew that all was well. A radiant glow played about his features. He was himself again. Catching up his wand, he broke away with mad strides, as if pursued by very demons. Only by running could I keep up with the sight of him. On and on we sped along the banks of Lul Patul, stream of the drowsy watery waters. Mile by mile, Benny Aga caroling his wild chants of glad thanks, and I panting as if bent upon escaping fleshless death itself. Another 100 paces and I would have fallen headlong into the ground. My feet seemed shod with lead. Bulger set up a most piteous whining as he saw the look of despair settling on my face. Suddenly the blind hermit halted, and turning towards me, cried out in joyous tones, "This is the place, my son. It is all over now. Fear nothing. Mount on my shoulders. Thou wilt not add a feather's weight to the burdens which I carry there. Be not troubled about thy dog. Lul Patul has no terrors for him." Such was my confidence in the blind hermit's power to bear me safely that I did not wait for a second bidding to mount upon his shoulders, although as far as I could see, the waters of Lul Patul looked just as black and deep as ever. Advancing to the edge of the stream, Beni Aga now began, with a quick and nervous movement of his staff, to search for hidden stepping stones. Oh, and we are at the time for the break. Be back in about 3 minutes.
Looking for breathtaking photography that speaks for itself? Whether it's the raw beauty of nature, the sleek professionalism of corporate imagery, or the infinite wonders of the sky, Donovan Pudoka captures it all. With over 10 years of experience, Donovan's lens doesn't just take pictures, it tells stories. His work is perfect for travel publications, corporate branding, artistic prints, or anyone who appreciates stunning photography. If you need high-quality images that elevate your project, Donovan Pudoka delivers. Have we sparked your interest in Donovan's work? Check it out at matrixminds/Pudoka. My eye promises you, you will not be disappointed.
This CBD fluid is a whole flower fluid extracted from the cannabis flower. We don't use any heat, butane, or chemicals when we extract, so we get all of the components of the plant. All the CBD, CBG, CBA, all the terpenes, all the flavonoids. This allows our body to absorb at 60 to 90% rather than the average of 6 to 10% absorption you would get with a CBD oil. Because our bodies are made up of mostly water and this is a fluid, it's highly absorbable so that you're getting 500% more nutraceuticals per dose. We also have this available in our CBD spray as well as a muscle rub with all kinds of botanicals. You're going to absolutely love it.
Check it out, Brainiacs. matrixminds.live/CBD. The CBD I use. Feel free again. Feel alive again.
Hey there, Hunter. Go check out our friends at Colorado Custom Game Calls. They are all about creating a high-quality, custom, unique game calls at an affordable price. They are here for hunters that can't and won't pay upwards of $180 to $200 per game call. They pride themselves on giving their customers the opportunity to not only purchase an affordable and high-quality call, but to customize their game call to their liking. So listen up and go check them out. That's www.coloradocustomgamecalls.com. They got calls for all type of game, and all the game calls can be custom made to your own likeness. That's www.coloradocustomgamecalls.com. Tell them Matthew sent you from the Matrix Minds.
What is up, all my beautiful and gorgeous souls? I am Michelle Espinosa, otherwise known as the Shaman, through the Matrix Mind Media. So tell me, how many times have you wished that you had that special power of prediction? You know, to know what was going to happen before it actually happened and took place. To have some power and control over that situation before things came flying at you out of left field. The thing is, you actually can have that power. You can be aware of what's coming. Tune in to Astrology TV with me for Breaking the Cage every Sunday evening at 10 p.m. Eastern on the Matrix Mind Media. And I I will go through the astrology and help put you on the right course and get you back in control of your own life. Love you guys.
I just love those commercials. So we are back. My name is Kristen Harding. Show is just a moment, and we are reading the Baron Trump collection. We are on page 99, and advancing to the edge of the stream, Bene Aga now began with a quick and nervous movement of his staff to search for hidden stepping stones. In vain I strained my eyes to catch some sign of resting place for his feet, and yet they were there, for with giant strides, steady, sure, and rapid, Beni Aga passed over the drowsy waters of Lul Patul and set me safely down on the other bank. I made effort to speak my thanks, but wonderment had robbed my power of tongue and utterance. I could only gaze in silence upon that noble face, now clad in all its former serenity, then turn and follow its owner's footsteps. After a few miles further advance, Beni Aga halted, and bending his gaze upon me as if his eyes were as full of light as his look was of radiance, he spoke as follows: "My son, my task is done. Look, dost thou not see? Let's try that again. Look, dost thou not see that gleam of light yonder? 'Tis the outer wall of Palin Matalan. Pass it, and thou wilt enter the world of noise and glare once more. Thou hast no further need of me. Go straight on, and in a brief half hour the sun's rays will greet thee again. Once outside this pathless wood, thou wilt find thyself upon a lofty parapet, a sheer height of 200 feet above the plains below. Look about thee, and thou wilt see a stairway of solid rock leading downward to the plain, not such as built by hands of man, with steps of even height, hewn regular and smooth, but a rude, fantastic flight of stairs left standing there by nature when she cleared away the mass on each side. Upon these narrow steps, smoothed by the beating storms of 10,000 years, the waters daily pour a treacherous slime, so that those who have rashly tried to pass to their fair land below now lie among the jagged rocks. No foot is sure enough to tread the slippery steps of Boga Drapa. To fall means certain death. I cannot counsel thee, my son. Be wary, be wise. Farewell." As this last word fell from Bene Aga's lips, he flashed out of my sight like spirit form. The pollen matala covered him with his darkness, and he was gone. The tears gathered in my eyes. Fain would I have pressed its hand to my lips. I knew it was useless for me to try and call him back or follow him, so with a heavy heart I turned and pressed forward in the direction he had indicated. I was soon at the outer edge of Palin Matalan, and to tell the truth, I felt my heavy heart grow light again. Bulger, too, showed his delight at being once more in the warm sunshine. Breaking out into the wildest barking, he raced hither and thither with joyous air of a boy set free from a long and irksome task. As Beni Aga had described to me, I now found myself standing upon a lofty parapet, overlooking a delightful valley, through which I longed to wander, after my stay in Beni Aga's cave and the gloomy trail through Palin Matala's depths. Walking along the edge of the cliff, I was not long in coming upon the stair of the evil spirit, or Bogadrapa, as it was called. It was jagged, irregular, and tilted here and there, and yet quite even and stair-like when one considered that it was of nature's building. As the blind hermit had warned me, the treacherous slime covered Bogadrapa's entire length, forever renewed by the impure waters which trickled down its steps. To attempt to descend would have been worse than madness. No human foot was sure enough to tread those slippery stones and reach the bottom. Although I was impelled by the strongest desire to hasten forward, I saw that a single rash act might end my life. Ordinary obstacles have no terror for me, but when nature sets a threatening barrier in my way, I halt, but do not surrender. And therefore I sat calmly down to ponder over this problem that faced me. For 3 days I tarried on this parapet, and each day I visited Bogadrapa and gazed long and fixedly upon its far-reaching flight of rocky steps. On the 3rd day I had solved the problem. Hastily gathering up every fragment of limestone lying near me, I piled it in a cone-shaped heap, and around it and over it I laid a mass of dry leaves and billets, and over all such logs as I could lift. Then striking fire with my flint and tinder, I set the pile in flames. In the morning I was rejoiced to find a heap of the purest quicklime beneath the ashes. By means of an empty skull of some animal of the deer family, which I found lying near, I at once began to feed the trickling waters over Bogadrapa's steps with the lime. All that day and up to noon the next, I kept the water, which flowed down the stairway, milk white with lime. Now, however, came the greatest difficulty. From the size of the stream, I realized that it would be impossible for me to stay its course by means of any dam that I could build for a longer time than one brief half hour. But I dared not wait too long for the coating of lime, which by this time I knew must have been deposited on the rocky steps to harden in the sun. The dam might break and undo all my work. At high noon, when the sun was beating down the hottest, I put the last touch to my dam. I was startled to see with what rapidity the water had gathered in the basin I had built. With anxious eyes and throbbing heart, I stood at the head of Bogadrapa's stair of rock and gazed up and down. I could see no sign of drying on the black and glistening steps. One moment after another glided by. At last a faint trace of whiteness began to show itself here and there. I turned an anxious glance at the gathering waters. The frail dam seemed about to yield to the ever-increasing pressure. In one or two places I caught glimpses of tiny rivulets trickling through. Once more, with a terrible feeling of faintness, I glanced down the long, dark flight of steps. Half blinded by the noonday sun, I nevertheless caught sight of a snow-white crust on the stairway. Now was my time or never. Calling out to Bulger to precede me, I sprang boldly down the stair which till that moment had been black with treacherous slime. The waters broke away and came rushing on my very heels. Down, down I went into its headlong haste, bounding like a deer from step to step. My heart sank within me as I felt the torrent, now mad and raging, spatter its spray on my neck. Another instant and I'm saved. My feet strike firm. I see the fair country come nearer and nearer. Another leap, and with my faithful Bulger, I've cleared the dreaded stairway of Bogadrapa. Staggering forward, I reach the greensward of the valley and fall fainting after my terrible race for life. Bulger's mingled wailing and caresses roused me after a few moments of clouded brain, and then all was well. And yet a shudder stole over me as I raised my eyes to take a last look at the rocky stairway of Bogadrapa, now clad once more in its black, glistening, treacherous slime. Refreshed by a hearty meal upon the luscious fruits which grew in wonderful profusion on every side, followed by a deep draught of cool, clear spring water, and calling joyfully to my faithful Bulger to follow me, I set out for the distant summit of the ridge which shut in this peaceful little corner of the earth's surface, so well fitted for the home of human beings, and yet so utterly abandoned and tenantless, even by four-footed creatures. While I am a great admirer of nature in all of her aspects, from wildest grandeur to picture-like delicacy, yet no spot which is not inhabited by man or beast can hold me long content. I must have life, not the dull spiritless life of a tree, shrub, or plant, ever chained to one spot, but the restive, bounding, throbbing life of man or animal to study, contemplate, and reflect upon. Therefore it was that I determined to pass at once out of this beautiful little valley. I pushed on with eager step, for I was desirous of gaining the high land before nightfall. In this I was successful, but the twilight had so deepened when I reached the crest of the ridge that any survey of the country lying beyond was impossible. Shortly after I had lighted a bivouac fire, I'm not sure what that is, Bulger came in with a bird of the quail kind, and I proceeded to broil it on the live embers. The faithful animal was delighted to be once more in a country in which he could serve me, and while our supper was cooking, took occasion to go through a number of his old tricks, in order to see his little master's face brighten up. Side by side we lay down for the night in that far-away land, and we were soon fast asleep. The morning broke with rare splendor. I hastened to examine the country beneath me. It was dotted here and there by groves and bits of woodland, and seemed unusually green and fruitful. What attracted my attention more than anything else was the fact that as far as my eye could reach, the region was watered by a perfect network of little rivers, which glistened in the morning sun like bands of burnished silver. I had never seen the like. It occurred to me at once that should these streams prove too deep and rapid to ford, it would force me to change my course entirely and pass either to the north or south until I reached a clear country. It was pretty well towards sundown when I stood upon the confines of this strange land, which I named Polypotomo, or Many Rivers. The streams, which varied from 10 to 20 feet in width, were deep, clear, and swift. As you may readily imagine, such a country was very productive. Fruit and flower-bearing shrubs and trees, all of a most beautiful green, grew in the wildest abundance. The air, cooled and purified as it was by the numerous streams of limpid water, was like a magic inhalation, carrying a strange feeling of dreamy delight to every part of the family. Said I to myself, if this fair land be not inhabited, then it is a monstrous pity, for here kind nature has spread her riches with more than a usually lavish hand. Bulger and I stretched ourselves upon the bank of the first stream we reached, and we were preparing for a nap after our long day's tramp, when suddenly the strangest noises reached our ears. He stared up with a look of mingled alarm and curiosity which, could I have seen my own face, I would have undoubtedly have found pictured there in equally strong lines. Louder and louder grew these curious sounds. I listened with pricked up ears as I strained my eyes in the direction whence they came, eager to catch the first glimpse of the beings who uttered them. I had not long to wait. About an eighth of a mile away, my eyes fell upon a sight which, in spite of the possible dangers threatening my life, in case these creatures had proven to be vicious or savage, caused me to burst out into a fit of uncontrollable laughter. There, in full view, was a troop of human creatures, dwarfish in stature, not being much over 4 feet in height, who seemed incapable of using their legs as we do, but moved about from one place to another by hopping, as some birds do, or as rabbits would do if they moved about standing upright on their hind legs. In an instant they caught the sound of my voice, and with swiftness of the wind, and with an ease that astounded me, leaped over the 2 intervening streams, each of which was at least 15 feet in width, and came bounding toward us with the same gigantic leaps. The whole thing was done so quickly, and the mode of locomotion was so novel and altogether wonderful, that I was surrounded before I knew what had happened to me. It is needless to say that I couldn't understand their language, although I soon mastered it, consisting, as it did, of pure Aryan roots, no word being of more than 3 letters. The man-hoppers, such was my translation of their name, Umai, Umi, UMI, Umi Lobas, ranged themselves in a circle around Bulger and me, threw themselves on their faces, so to speak, for their arms were ridiculously out of all proportion to their bodies, and threatened with shrill outcries and menacing movements to kick Bulger and me to death instantly unless we surrendered unconditionally. It was a novel sight. Bulger was inclined to advise resistance, but when I had given a hurried glance at their feet, which were very large and attached to astonishingly vigorous legs, I deemed it prudent to run up the white flag. In fact, I gave them to understand that we threw ourselves on their mercy. But first, a word about these strange people. They were, as I have said, small of stature, and let me add that upon their narrow sloping shoulders were set delicate doll-like heads, animated by large, lustrous black eyes of an extreme softness in expression. Their arms looked like the arms of a boy on the body of a man, but although so small, for they reached only to their waists and ended in tiny, tiny, shapely hands, yet they showed themselves possessed of extraordinary strength and dexterity. Their legs, however, were the most powerful and wonderful part of them. In fact, I might almost say that Umi Lobas were all legs, so out of proportion was the development of their limbs. The effect of this disproportion may easily be imagined. It so dwarfed their bodies that they appeared like cones set upon 2 legs. "Miscreant!" cried the leader, as I learned 3 days later when I had mastered their language. "If thou dost not instantly admit that His Majesty Garu, King of the Umilobas, is not the fastest, farthest, and most graceful jumper in the world, thou shalt be kicked to death without the least ceremony." I made signs that I was quite willing to admit this, although I didn't understand exactly what it was. Seeing that I was not disposed to attempt any harm, the man-hoppers sprang to their feet and seated themselves in a perfect ring around Bulger and me, like so many rabbits, when standing on their hind feet to reach something, intent upon getting a good look at us, or at me rather, for Bulger was evidently no great novelty for them. They kept up a perfect rattle of remarks in shrill piping tones upon my personal appearance. I too was by no means idle. I kept even pace with their galloping curiosity, studying the expression of their faces and the movements of their bodies. After a few moments I was given to understand that I must start at once for the palace of their gracious monarch, Garou, the 1000th, for they were a very ancient people. As I rose to my feet and took a few steps toward the water, intending to assure them that I could not leap across the stream, it became their turn to laugh. And laugh they did, too, with such spirit, such heartiness, I might almost say such violence, that I never realized till then that they laugh best who laughs last. Again and again their piping pygmy voices broke out in shrill chorus, while their pretty doll faces were convulsed with merriment. Bulger repeatedly showed his teeth and gave vent to short, spiteful barks as the Umilobas continued to hymn their unseemly behavior. But I knew it would only injure us in the end if I showed any signs of anger, so I simply shrugged my shoulders and waited for them to recover from their fit of merriment. Finally, between the pauses of laughter, I caught such words as pendulum legs, man scissors, man tongs, flip flop, wiggle waggle, here she goes, there she goes. Such were a few of the terms, expressive of the impression which my poor unoffending legs made upon the minds of the Umilobas. They quieted down at last and began to make signs that I should prepare to follow them. When at last I succeeded in making them understand that I was not a jumper, and could no more leap across the stream in front of us than I could hop over the moon, their mirth now gave place to disgust. Such pleasant phrases as lead legs, two-legged snail, little man stuck in the ground, little man tied to his head, etc., etc., were fired at me. After a consultation, it was determined to dispatch 2 of their number for a sort of porte-chaise in use among the Umilobas, in which to transport Bulger and me to the king's palace. Away went the messengers like the wind, in leaps of 20 feet, seeming scarcely to touch the ground, bounding along in the distance like pith-balls. After a short delay they reappeared bearing slung on a sort of yoke, resting it upon their shoulders, a stout wicker basket. Bulger and I were invited to step into it. The cover was closed and securely fastened by a stout leather thong. Then, with a bumpety-bump sort of motion, away we went, across land and water. Bulger whined piteously and fixed his lustrous eyes upon me as if to say, "Little master, if they are transporting us to torture or death, I am glad to go with thee." Oh my goodness, we are at the top of the hour and I'm at the top of the page. I'm taking that as a sign. So that is all for now, my dear, dear friends. Well, hello, Katie. Oh, I'm so glad I looked up. Oh, get well, my friend. So that is all for now, my friends. Thank you so much for joining us. Never forget that you are amazing. You are loved. Be well, be safe out there. Protect your peace. And I'll see you on the next video. Bye.